Most of the time I try to entertain with my post covers, but once in a while I get an uncontrollable urge to say something serious. Like everyone else, I'm concerned with the world situation, and like everyone else, I like to contribute something to help. The only way I can help is through my pictures. So for a long time, I've been trying to think of a subject that might be of some help.
In 1877, after banning slavery, Jim Crow laws were born. They were rules created to segregate black people from white. People of color were allowed in certain restaurants, couldn't drink from the same drinking fountains, were sent to schools that were in terrible conditions, and so much more. They had to deal with all kinds of discrimination and negativity. As Frederick Douglass, a black abolitionist, said, "Slavery is indeed gone, but its shadow still lingers over the country and poisons more or less the moral atmosphere of all sections of the Republic." People across the U.S. strived for change. They would hold protests, lining streets, holding signs. Black people started sitting in white-only restaurants, refusing to leave. It was during this time that Rosa Parks was arrested for standing her ground and refusing to give up her seat for a white man. Because of this, she sparked a nationwide boycott that got the buses to remove all segregation laws. She later said about the experience, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that wasn't true. I was not tired physically. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in."
Martin Luther King was a civil rights activist who is famous for the speech he gave in the 60s titled, "I Have a Dream." He was very active in civil rights and was able to make a huge difference for black people. He helped lead the bus boycott started by Rosa Parks and greatly contributed to the Act of 1965 that gave African Americans the right to vote. Both Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, as well as many other people, risked all that they had to make a difference in what was going on. But there were those who didn't listen. There were people who wouldn't listen to those voices, especially of the people who were black. Someone needed to help them be heard by those who wouldn't listen, to show what they were struggling against and fighting for. That's where Norman Rockwell came in.
Norman Rockwell was an artist, and a good one too. He'd used his talents to paint covers for many magazines such as the Saturday Evening Post. He was well known in America for having drawn more posters and conveying average American life.
In 1961, Norman Rockwell published The Golden Rule, hoping to inspire people through it. It showed people of all main religions and cultures. Most of them were actually friends, neighbors, or students that lived fairly nearby. About 20 years earlier, 1941, Franklin D. Roosevelt had given his Four Freedoms speech, where he introduced 4 causes to fight for in the war. Through the first few months of 1943, Norman Rockwell published paintings of each of the 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. He had been trying to find a way to make a difference through his art. He tried reading the Atlantic Charter for inspiration, but he couldn't get past the first chapter. But something in it caught his eye: the mention of 2 of the 4 freedoms, freedom from want and fear. This inspired him to do a painting on the 4 freedoms. They played a very important role in the war effort. Each person who bought war bonds would receive a copy of all of his 4 freedoms. They were even featured on the Freedom Train, a train that contained on display historical documents such as the Emancipation Proclamation, the Constitution, etc. Both the Golden Rule and the 4 freedoms were very impactful and paved the way for many others.
When Rockwell had worked for the Saturday Evening Post, he was not allowed to include black people unless they were portrayed in a servile working position. Rockwell even recalls having been told to paint out a black man from a picture he drew for them. In 1963, after 47 years of work there, Norman Rockwell left his job at the Post and began working at Look magazine. They encouraged him to be bolder and let him include black people in any position. This was very helpful.
On the morning of November 14th, 1960, Ruby Bridges walked up the steps leading to her new school. Next to her were police escorts, and all around her were people rioting. Because of this, she spent her first day of school in the principal's office, safe from riots and the commotion of angry parents taking their kids out of the building, refusing to let them go to school, with a black girl. She would be spending the rest of the year in an empty classroom being taught by Barbara Henry, the only white teacher who was willing to have her in her class. In 1964, the Look magazine released Norman Rockwell's painting, The Problem We All Live With. It was a painting of young Ruby Bridges, who was 6 years old at the time, walking to school, being escorted by police officers. Norman Rockwell had been careful to make everything just right. Ruby Bridges is seen closer to the policeman in front, pressing forward, not looking back. On the wall next to her is a recently thrown tomato, a racial slur spray-painted above her. Norman Rockwell even painted sand into it to make it look more real. It tells of the way black people were really being treated. Rockwell tried to communicate this issue, and it worked. Many people wrote to him about it, saying how much of a life changer it was. One man wrote, "Rockwell's picture is worth 1,000 words. I am saving this issue for my children with the hope that by the time they become old enough to comprehend its meaning, the subject matter will have become history."
In June of 1964, 3 civil rights workers in Philadelphia, Mississippi, Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman, were murdered by Deputy Sheriff Price and the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist group. Look magazine was working on an article giving more details on the events of the murder titled Southern Justice, while Norman Rockwell worked on the painting that would go with it. He started gathering newspaper articles about it and began taking pictures of possible poses, including one with his son, Jarvis. He tried a few different formats for the painting, including one where Price and the Klansmen were actually shown in the picture. He used some photos of these men from the newspaper to get an idea of what they looked like so that the men in the painting could have a likeness to the real men who had died. He later wrote that he didn't try to have them look completely the same because he wanted them to be an example of a much larger story.
In the end, it was not his painting that was published, but one of his studies. Norman Rockwell said that by the time he had done the painting, the anger had gone out of it. By the time he completed it, laws removed Jim Crow rules and gave black people the right to vote. Even then, many people were quite upset with the rule change. Rockwell's job wasn't over. Once again, he would shock the nation, showing how much black people were really struggling.
Though Norman Rockwell was getting older, and he was not able to work as much on his paintings, he still continued to make powerful art. In 1967, he published his painting, New Kids in the Neighborhood. It shows a group of white kids looking at 2 black kids who appear to be moving into the neighborhood. They look eager to play with these new kids, but also a little hesitant because of their skin color. In the corner, a woman peers out through a window watching them. The only other adult is the mover. Though blacks and whites were starting to come together, this painting shows how hard it still was, especially as people started to integrate. It also shows the effects of segregation and racism for a child.
A lot of people think that what Norman Rockwell did was wrong. They said he was a hypocrite and that he did it for money. They said that no white man should be given credit for helping black men. After The Problem We All Live With was published, many people were enraged. One man wrote, "Just where does Norman Rockwell live? Just where does your editor live? Probably both of these men live in all-white, highly expensive, highly exclusive neighborhoods. Oh, what hypocrites all of you are."
Many other people sent similar letters. Although these letters were negative, the way people reacted to the painting meant that people were paying attention. So whether or not people think that Norman Rockwell was a hypocrite or a traitor for doing what he did, it was noticed, even by those who didn't agree. People paid attention.
Norman Rockwell was able to communicate through his art and speak to those who wouldn't listen to other voices. He used a way of communication that was so effective that only very few could do. He inspired a new generation and helped a large movement still going on today. Many people are still influenced by his art, as well as other images based off of his work. Recently, a picture went viral of Vice President Kamala Harris walking down the street. Her shadow is of Ruby Bridges from Rockwell's painting. Even though he would get criticized for being a hypocrite, he truly wasn't. He was just portraying life as it was and how we needed to change it. And if you ask Norman what his secret was, he'd simply say, "Some people have been kind enough to call me a fine artist. I've always called myself an illustrator. I'm not sure what the difference is. All I know is that whatever type of work I do, I try to give it my very best. Art has been my life."